My brother laughed at me when I gave him $100 for the old blanket his dog slept on, but soon he was shocked when he learned that blanket made me a millionaire. Ever feel like a shadow in your own family? Like you're just taking up space while everyone else shines? That's been my life for as long as I can remember. The name's Jake. I'm 25, work at a hardware store in a small Arizona town, and I'm the family disappointment. Not that anyone needs to say it out loud anymore. It's just understood. My dad's a big-shot lawyer everyone in town knows, with his name plastered on billboards along the highway. Thomas Reynolds, making justice work for you, complete with that cheesy pointing finger. The man has 3 Mercedes and a country club membership he barely uses except to network with potential clients. My brother Tim, he's the golden boy with the Cornell degree hanging in Dad's office. Not Tim's office, because why would Tim need to show off when Dad does it for him? Tim landed a 6-figure job right out of college at some financial firm in Phoenix. He visits on weekends sometimes, pulling up in his Tesla, talking about stocks and investments while Dad nods along like Tim's explaining the secrets of the universe. And then there's me, the one who just doesn't apply himself, the one who could do so much better if he just tried, the one whose achievements, when I actually have them, get half-hearted, that's nice, before the conversation shifts back to whatever amazing thing Tim did this week. Back in high school, I once won a local art competition, and my mom stuck the newspaper clipping on the fridge for exactly 3 days until Tim made vice president at 27, becoming the youngest VP in his company's history. That clipping got framed and still hangs in the hallway 5 years later. Last Thanksgiving, I overheard my dad talking to my uncle in the kitchen. "Jake's still finding himself," he said, with that disappointed sigh I know all too well. "Some people bloom late, I guess. We're hoping he'll grow out of this phase." This phase being my entire life, apparently. But there was one person who saw me differently. My grandmother Ruby. She was half Navajo, though you wouldn't know it from looking at my pale-as-hell skin. Those genes skipped right over me. Mom got some of it. The high cheekbones, the thick black hair, but me? Nada. Built like my dad's side, with all the charisma of a cardboard box, according to the high school bullies who never let me forget it. But the stories? Those Ruby made sure I got in full. When I was a kid, I'd spend weekends at her place out near the reservation. Her house wasn't much. A small 2-bedroom with a porch that sagged in the middle and creaked like it was telling its own stories. But man, it felt more like home than our big suburban house ever did. We'd sit on that porch wrapped in this old blanket she had, a Navajo weaving with deep reds, blacks, and rich blues in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change the longer you looked at them. She'd make hot chocolate with cinnamon, and a pinch of something she'd never name, probably chili powder, knowing her sense of humor, and we watched the desert sunset while she told me stories about the Dine, the Navajo people, and how they understood the world. "Jake," she'd say, "your path is like a river. Sometimes it twists and turns, but it always reaches the sea. Never let anyone tell you your river isn't flowing the right way." When I complain about not being smart like Tim or smooth-talking like Dad, she'd tap my chest right over my heart. Smart is different things to different people. Your brother understands numbers. Your father understands people's fears. You understand beauty and truth. The world needs all 3. Those were the only times I felt like I was somebody, like I mattered, not because of what I achieved or what college accepted me, but just because I was there listening. Ruby never compared me to Tim or asked why I wasn't more like my dad. She'd look at my amateur sketches and say they had soul. She'd listen to my half-baked ideas about opening a cafe someday and nod like they made perfect sense. She taught me about the blanket, too. "This isn't just fabric," she'd explain, running her wrinkled fingers over the patterns. "This is history you can touch. The Navajo saved the Chuo sheep from extinction in the 1970s just to keep making these blankets. The wool is special. It takes dye differently, feels different. This was made in the old way, with indigo and cochineal beetles for the colors. Most people don't know that bright red comes from crushed-up bugs. Kind of cool, right?" She'd wink, and I'd feel like I was in on some cosmic secret. The last time I saw her alive, she was in the hospital. Cancer had eaten away at her until she was half the size I remembered, but her eyes were still bright. She held my hand and said, "Remember, you're stronger than they know, stronger than you know." I didn't understand what she meant then. I was just trying not to cry in front of her. When she died 3 months ago, it felt like someone had ripped out something essential inside me. The funeral was small. Ruby didn't have many friends left, and Dad handled everything with his usual efficiency. There were no Navajo rituals, no acknowledgement of that part of her life. Just a standard service, a few words about being a loving grandmother. And then it was over. I expected the reading of the will to be simple. Ruby didn't have much, just her house, some savings, and her personal belongings. But then Dad's lawyer friend Harold pulled out the document and cleared his throat. The house and all financial assets to Thomas Reynolds. My dad nodded like this was expected. The collection of books on Navajo culture and history to Timothy Reynolds. Tim looked surprised but pleased. Books he'd never even known existed were suddenly valuable to him. And then it came to me. I straightened in my chair, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe she'd left me the blanket. Maybe she'd remembered how much it meant to us. To Jacob Reynolds, Harold read, adjusting his glasses, various sentimental items of negligible financial value as determined by the executor of the estate. And just like that, the room moved on. Dad started talking about selling Ruby's house, and Tim was already thumbing through one of the books, muttering about how some of these might be worth something to collectors. I sat there, stunned. What sentimental items? I finally asked. Dad waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, whatever's left after we clear out the valuable stuff. Some photos, maybe some costume jewelry. We'll box it up for you." That weekend, I drove out to Ruby's house. Dad had already hired a company to clean out for selling, but they hadn't started yet. I had a key. Ruby had given me one years ago, telling me her home was always my home. I wandered through the rooms, memories hitting me with each step. The kitchen where she taught me to make fry bread. The living room where we'd watch old westerns, and she critiqued how they portrayed Native Americans. Her bedroom, with the dream catcher I'd made her in 4th grade still hanging in the window. But the blanket was gone. I searched everywhere. Closets, the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, the storage space under the stairs. Nothing. Someone had already taken it. I drove straight to my parents' house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got there, Tim's Tesla was in the driveway. Great. The whole family. Just what I needed. I found them in the living room. Dad reading the newspaper. Mom scrolling through her iPad. Tim texting someone. Probably his perfect wife about their perfect life. "Where's Grandma Ruby's blanket?" I asked without preamble. Dad lowered his newspaper, looking annoyed at the interruption. "What blanket?" "The Navajo blanket. The one she always had on her porch. The one we used to sit under while she told stories." My voice was rising, but I couldn't help it. Mom frowned, trying to remember. "Oh, that old thing? I think we brought it back here after we cleared out some of her personal effects." Tim snorted without looking up from his phone. "You mean that dirty old rag she had? Why would you want that?" I felt my blood boiling. It wasn't a rag. It was a traditional Navajo weaving. It was important to her. And to me. Dad sighed, using his explaining things an idiot's voice, the one I'd heard my whole life. "Jake, that thing was falling apart. It probably had all kinds of dust and allergens in it. Mom did you a favor by not saving it for you. So where is it?" I demanded. No one answered for a moment. Then Tim started laughing. He actually started laughing. "It's outside," he said between chuckles. "In Rocky's doghouse. The dog needed something to sleep on." Rocky was Tim's prized German shepherd, a purebred show dog. He kept at our parent house because his wife was allergic. The dog that had won ribbons and cost more than my car. I stood there, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. They'd given Ruby's blanket, her heritage, her history, our connection, to a dog to sleep on. "You're joking," I said, but I knew he wasn't. "If you want so bad, you can have it," Tim said with a shrug. "But it's probably covered in dog hair, and who knows what else by now." Dad folded his newspaper with a crisp snap. Tim, don't be cruel. Jake, if you want the blanket, you can take it. But I don't see why you'd want that old thing when there are much nicer mementos we could. How much? I interrupted. Dad blinked. What? How much for the blanket? You took everything else she had. How much do you want for it? Tim grinned, seeing an opportunity for entertainment. $100. Tim, Mom exclaimed, but there was no real objection in her voice. Fine, I said, pulling out my wallet. I'd just been paid, and I had exactly $127 to my name until next Friday. I counted out 5 20s and laid them on the coffee table. Tim's eyes widened. He hadn't expected me to actually pay. Dude, I was kidding. It's worthless. Not to me. I said simply. I looked him straight in the eye. Where's the blanket? Tim shrugged and pointed to the back door. Dog house is by the oak tree. Have at it. I walked outside, feeling their eyes on my back. I could hear Tim saying something and then laughing, probably some joke at my expense. I didn't care. I just needed to get that blanket. Rocky growled when I approached his doghouse, a fancy wooden structure that probably cost more than a month of my rent. I could see the edge of the blanket poking out from inside. I grabbed a tennis ball from the yard and threw it, and thankfully Rocky chased after it. I reached into the doghouse and pulled out Ruby's blanket. It was dirty, covered in dog hair, and smelled like it had been outside for weeks. But underneath all that, I could still see the patterns, still feel the tightly woven wool that had kept generations warm. As I walked back to my car, I heard the screen door slam. Tim was standing on the porch, smirking. Enjoy your $100 dog bed, bro. I didn't respond. I just got in my car, laid the blanket carefully on the passenger seat, and drove away. Away from the house I grew up in but never belonged in. Away from the family that saw me as nothing but a disappointment. I drove toward my apartment, toward Sarah, the only person besides Ruby who ever really saw me. As I stopped at a red light, I ran my fingers over the geometric patterns of the blanket, feeling a connection to Ruby that transcended death. This blanket was all I had left of the one person who believed in me. And somehow, I knew that would be enough. The light turned green, and I pressed the gas, heading home with the last piece of Ruby's legacy. I didn't know it then, but that dirty, dog hair-covered blanket was about to change everything. I pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex, the blanket still sitting beside me on the passenger seat, like some dirty, stray animal I'd rescued. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded me of the patterns woven into the fabric. For a moment, I just sat there, exhausted, wondering if I'd just blown $100, grocery money for the week, on nothing but memories and dog hair. Our apartment was on the second floor of a building that had seen better days, in a complex that always smelled vaguely of someone's cooking. Not the worst place in town, but definitely not where my parents expected their son to end up. The rent was manageable on my hardware store salary, especially split with Sarah. Just thinking about her made things a little better. We'd met 3 years ago at a community college art class I was taking in a desperate attempt to find something. Anything I was good at. She was a teacher's assistant. And she'd stopped by my easel, looked at my pathetic attempt at a still life, and said, "You're seeing things differently than everyone else. That's rare. Not that's wrong or that's bad," which is what I expected. Just different and rare, like Ruby would have said. I trudged up the stairs, the blanket bundled under my arm, probably looking like I was carrying garbage. When I opened the door, the smell of chili hit me and my stomach growled. Sarah was in the kitchen, her dark hair pulled up in a messy bun, wearing one of my old flannel shirts over leggings. She took one look at my face and knew. She always knew, without saying anything. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked over to wrap her arms around me. She was 5'2" to my 6 feet, but somehow she always made me feel like she was the one sheltering me. After a moment, she pulled back and noticed a bundle under my arm. "Is that?" I nodded, too tired to explain just yet. "Bring it to the table," she said, already clearing away a pile of art supplies and bills. Sarah was an elementary school art teacher by day and a freelance illustrator by night. Our small dining table usually looked like a craft store had exploded on it. I laid out the blanket, and even under the harsh fluorescent kitchen light, with all the dirt and dog hair, you could tell it was something special. The geometric pattern seemed to tell a story. Draw your eye from one section to another in a way that felt intentional, meaningful. "Jake, it's beautiful," Sarah said softly, running her fingers over a section that showed less damage. "What happened?" So I told her everything. The will reading, the search through Ruby's house, finding out they'd given her blanket to the dog, Tim's smug face when he charged me $100 for it, the whole humiliating scene. Sarah's eyes flashed with that protective anger I'd seen before, like when a gallery owner had tried to talk down to me at a local art show, and she'd stepped in with the sweetest smile and most devastating takedown I'd ever witnessed. But instead of launching into the rant I expected about my family, she surprised me. "Let's clean it," she said, determination in her voice. "Right now." And that's how we spent our Friday night. Not going out to movies like we'd planned, but hunched over our bathtub, carefully washing Ruby's blanket section by section with special wool detergent Sarah had for her own art projects. The water ran brown and gray, and we had to change it multiple times. We laid towels on the bathroom floor, patting the blanket dry, then draped it over a drying rack Sarah used for her watercolor paintings. It was past midnight when we finished, both of us with pruny fingers and aching backs. We ordered pizza because the chili had long since gone cold, and sat on the living room floor eating it, staring at the blanket as it dried. "It's really something, isn't it?" Sarah said, tilting her head. "The colors are so much brighter now. Look at that red. It's almost glowing." She was right. The cleaning had revealed vibrant colors that had been hidden under years of dust and dirt. The patterns were clearer now, too, diamonds and step pyramids, zigzagging lines that seemed to represent mountains or lightning. My grandmother said it was made with dyes from plants and bugs. I told her, "That bright red comes from crushed beetles." Sarah's eyes widened. "Cochineal. I learned about that in art history. That was like the most expensive red dye for centuries. European royalty paid fortunes for it because it was so vibrant and color-fast." I smiled, thinking how Ruby would have loved Sarah's enthusiasm. They'd never met. Ruby's health had started failing before Sarah and I got together, but I told each of them about the other. Ruby always ended those conversations with, "She's sound a keeper, Jake. Don't mess it up." "You know what?" Sarah said suddenly, grabbing her phone. "We should document this. I wish I'd taken a before picture when it was still dirty, but at least we can capture it now that it's clean. This transformation is amazing." But as she started snapping photos, her expression changed. "Actually, maybe we should do something else." A mischievous grin spread across her face, the one that usually meant either something really fun or minor trouble was about to happen. "What are you thinking?" I asked, both curious and slightly wary. "TikTok," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Hear me out. Everyone's doing these vintage find videos. You know, I found this at a garage sale for $5, and it's worth $5,000 kind of thing. We could do a joke one with the blanket." I wasn't sure how I felt about putting Ruby's blanket on social media as a joke, but Sarah must have seen my hesitation. "It could be fun," she said, softer now. "Something silly to make you laugh. After the day you've had, couldn't you use a laugh?" And that's how, at 1 a.m. on a Friday night, my girlfriend ended up wrapping herself in my grandmother's newly cleaned Navajo blanket, putting on a ridiculous fake auctioneer voice, and recording a 30-second TikTok. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced in that over-the-top voice, parading around our tiny living room with a blanket draped over her shoulders like a royal cape. "What would you pay for this exotic vintage textile? Found in a luxury dog mansion, previously enjoyed by a very fancy canine. Starting bids at $1 million. Do I hear 1,000,001? I couldn't help it. I started laughing. It was so absurd, so opposite of the emotional day I'd had, that something in me just broke open. Sarah kept going, making increasingly ridiculous claims about the blanket. It was once used as a napkin by Elvis. Aliens wove this in their spacecraft, while striking model poses and dramatic turns. By the end of it, I was laughing so hard my stomach hurt. It felt good, like releasing something toxic I'd been carrying. Sarah finished the video with a playful wink and said, "But seriously, how much would you pay for this thing? Comment below." Then she collapsed next to me, both of us giggling like kids. "Feel better?" she asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Yeah, I admit it, but no one's going to see that anyway. Your TikTok has, 200 followers." Sarah stuck out her tongue at me. 287, thank you very much. Mostly my students' parents. But who cares? It made you laugh, and that was the point. We went to bed shortly after, the blanket still drying on the rack. I fell asleep with Sarah curled against me, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Whatever that blanket was worth, even if it was just $100 I'd paid, it had already given me more than I expected. I woke up the next morning to Sarah shaking me, her eyes wide with excitement. Jake, wake up. You have to see this." I blinked awake, confused. What? What time is it?" "It's 8:30, but that doesn't matter. Look." She thrust her phone in my face, the screen so bright it made me squint. Once my eyes focused, I realized I was looking at her TikTok app, the video from last night. The one with her wrapped in Ruby's blanket, doing her auctioneer impression, had numbers next to it that didn't make sense to my sleep-addled brain. 200,000 views? I read. Sure, I was misunderstanding. That can't be right. It is. Sarah was practically bouncing on the bed. It went viral overnight. Look at the comments. There are thousands. I sat up, suddenly wide awake, and took the phone from her. Sure enough, the ridiculous video we'd made at 1 a.m. had somehow caught TikTok's algorithm just right and exploded. The comments were rolling in so fast, you could watch the numbers tick up in real time. OMG, that pattern looks vintage. I'd give you $50 for it, no cap. My grandma had something like this, but not as nice. Is this a Navajo blanket? Looks authentic. I scrolled through dozens of similar comments. People joking, making offers, asking questions. It was bizarre, seeing something so personal to me being commented on by strangers. But then one comment made me stop cold. This appears to be a first-phase Chief Navajo blanket, circa 1840 to 1860. If authentic, its value would be comparable to a Picasso painting. I'm a professor of Indigenous American art at UNM. DM me if you'd like more information. I stared at the username, DRM Gonzalez _NM. The profile picture showed an older man with salt and pepper hair and glasses, standing next to what looked like a museum display. "Sarah," I said slowly, "look at this one." She read it over my shoulder, and I felt her body tense with excitement. "Jake, what if?" "No way," I said immediately, handing the phone back to her. "It's just someone messing around, or trying to scam us. You know how the internet is." But Sarah was already tapping away on her phone. "I'm looking up this Dr. Gonzalez. Here, Dr. Manuel Gonzalez, professor of Indigenous American art and artifacts at the University of New Mexico. He specializes in textile arts of the Southwest, particularly Navajo weaving traditions. Jake, he's real." She showed me the university faculty page with the same man from the TikTok profile. It was definitely the same person. My heart started beating faster, but I tried to keep my expectations in check. Even if he is real, that doesn't mean what he's saying about the blanket is true. He's just seen a 30-second video of you goofing around with it. He can't possibly know what it really is. But Sarah was undeterred. What if he does, though? What if your grandmother's blanket is something special? Ruby was half Navajo, right? Maybe it's been in her family for generations. I hadn't thought of that. Ruby never talked much about her own parents or grandparents. I knew her father was Navajo and her mother was white, but that was about it. The blanket had just always been there, part of her, part of our time together. Should I message him? Sarah asked, her finger hovering over the DM button. I hesitated. On one hand, this seemed too good to be true, the kind of internet fantasy that never actually happens to real people. On the other hand, what if Ruby had left me something more valuable than I realized? Not just sentimentally, but literally? I'll do it, I said, taking the phone. If it's about Ruby's blanket, it should come from me. I composed a careful message. Dr. Gonzalez, I saw your comment on my girlfriend's TikTok about the blanket. It belonged to my grandmother, who was half Navajo. I'd be interested in hearing more about what you think it might be. I hit send, then immediately regretted it. What was I doing? Getting my hopes up for nothing? Setting myself up for some elaborate scam? But before I could spiral too far down that path, the message showed as seen, and 3 dots appeared, indicating he was typing a response. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for reaching out. Based on the patterns and colors visible in the video, I believe your blanket may be a significant historical artifact. The diagonal patterning and use of indigo blue are consistent with what we call first phase Navajo textiles, created between approximately 1820 to 1860. These were often made as gifts for chiefs or for trade with wealthy merchants. They are extremely rare. Fewer than 50 authenticated examples exist today. Would you be willing to meet? So I could examine it in person? I'm in Albuquerque, but I would be happy to meet you somewhere convenient. I showed the message to Sarah, my hands slightly shaking. This can't be real, I whispered. She squeezed my shoulder. What do we have to lose? If he's legit, this would be amazing. If he's not, well, we'll know pretty quickly, I think. She had a point. The worst that could happen was I'd waste some time meeting a scammer or someone who turned out to be mistaken. The best that could happen, I wasn't even sure what the best could be. There's a coffee shop right downtown, I said, making the decision. Public place, lots of people around. It's only about 2 hours from Albuquerque. I'll suggest meeting there. I replied to Dr. Gonzalez, suggesting Copper Mountain Coffee downtown the following afternoon. His response came almost immediately. Perfect. I'll be there at 2 p.m. Look for a man with a leather briefcase and a UNM lanyard. And Mr. Reynolds? Please bring the blanket in a protective covering if possible. If I'm right about what this is, it should be handled with care. After confirming the details, I put the phone down and looked at Sarah, a mix of emotions churning in my stomach. Excitement, disbelief, worry that I was being naive, and underneath it all, a strange feeling that Ruby was somehow orchestrating all this from wherever she was now. What are you thinking? Sarah asked, studying my face. I'm thinking my grandmother might be pulling cosmic strings, I said with a small laugh, like she found a way to keep helping me even after she's gone. Sarah smiled and took my hand. I wish I could have met her. She sounded like she was an amazing woman. She was, I said softly. And for the first time since she died, I feel like maybe she's still here in a way. Like she just winked at me from beyond. I looked over at the blanket, now dry and draped over the back of our couch. In the morning light, the colors seemed even more vibrant, the patterns more deliberate and significant. What had Ruby told me about it? That it wasn't just fabric, but history you could touch. I was beginning to wonder just how much history was woven into those threads, and what it might mean for my future. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., I'd find out if this was all a bizarre coincidence or something more. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. Ruby would have loved this unexpected twist in my river's journey. I barely slept that night. My mind kept racing, jumping between excitement and doubt like a kid playing hopscotch. What if this professor was right? What if Ruby's blanket, the one my brother's dog had been sleeping on, was actually worth something significant? Then again, what were the chances? Things like this didn't happen to people like me. They happened to lucky strangers in viral stories you scroll past on Reddit. Still, when morning came, I found myself handling the blanket with new care. I gently folded it and placed it in a clean plastic storage bin we had, following Dr. Gonzalez's advice about protecting it. Sarah kept catching me staring at it, lost in thought. What's going through your head? She asked as we ate breakfast. Honestly, I'm scared of hope. I admitted, my whole life has been one long lesson in lowered expectations. She reached across the table and took my hand. I know, but Jake, sometimes the universe surprises us. Ruby would want you to be open to that possibility. I nodded, thinking of Ruby's river metaphor. Maybe this was just another bend in the stream, leading somewhere unexpected. The hours crawled by until it was time to head downtown. Copper Mountain Coffee was the kind of place that tried hard to look hip and artisanal, with reclaimed wood counters and Edison bulbs dangling from the ceiling. It was usually full of college students and remote workers, which seemed perfect for meeting a stranger from the internet. Public, busy, safe. I arrived 20 minutes early, too nervous to sit at home any longer. Sarah wanted to come with me, but she had a weekend art workshop she was teaching, and I insisted she not cancel. Take pictures, she made me promise, and text me updates. I ordered a black coffee and claimed a table in the corner where I could watch the door. The plastic bin with the blanket sat on the chair next to me like a silent companion. Every time the door opened, my heart jumped a little. At exactly 2 p.m., punctuality that impressed me already, a man walked in who could only be Dr. Gonzalez. He looked to be in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and horn-rimmed glasses, wearing a blazer despite the warm weather. Just as he'd said, he carried a leather briefcase and had a UNM lanyard around his neck. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on me, or rather, on the storage bin beside me. I raised my hand in an awkward half-wave, and he made his way over. "Mr. Reynolds?" he asked, extending his hand. "Manuel Gonzalez." His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. Up close, he had the weathered look of someone who spent time outdoors, with laugh lines around his eyes and a tan that wasn't from a salon. "Jake," I said, "thanks for coming all this way. If what I suspect is in that container, I would have driven twice as far," he replied, setting his briefcase on the table. "May I?" I nodded, suddenly feeling protective. He must have sensed my hesitation. "Let me tell you a bit about myself first," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "I've been studying Navajo textiles for over 30 years. My grandmother was a weaver from the Shiprock area. I grew up watching her work, learning the patterns, understanding the cultural significance. Now I teach at UNM and consult for several museums and private collectors." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding across the table. It looked legitimate, University of New Mexico logo. His title is Professor of Indigenous American Art, Contact Information. "I saw your girlfriend's TikTok by complete accident," he continued. "My daughter showed it to me. She follows fashion and vintage content. The moment I saw that blanket in the background, I knew it might be something special. The diagonal patterning, the colors, they're distinctive of a very specific period in Navajo weaving." His enthusiasm seemed genuine, and I felt myself relaxing slightly. This didn't feel like a scam. It felt like talking to someone who was passionate about their field, like when Sarah got going about our history. "So, can I see it?" he asked again. I lifted the bin onto the table and carefully removed the lid. The blanket was still folded, and I gently pulled back the top layer to reveal the patterns. Dr. Gonzalez's reaction was immediate and dramatic. He actually gasped, his eyes widening behind his glasses. "Madre de Dios," he whispered, then caught himself. "I'm sorry, but this is extraordinary." He didn't touch it, just leaned forward, his eyes moving methodically across what was visible of the design. After a long moment, he sat back, his expression a mix of awe and academic focus. "Mr. Reynolds, Jake, do you know what you have here?" I shook my head. My grandmother always had it. It was just her blanket. We used to sit under it on her porch when I was a kid. "Your grandmother was Navajo, you said?" "Half. Her father was full Navajo. Her mother was white. She grew up near the reservation, but lived most of her adult life in the city." Dr. Gonzalez nodded, as if pieces were falling into place. "What was her name?" "Her Navajo name, if you know it. Ruby Tsosi was her married name. Her maiden name was Begay, I think. She didn't talk much about her early life." His eyebrows shot up. "Begay? Are you sure?" "Pretty sure." "Why?" He took a deep breath. "The Begay family has a significant place in Navajo weaving history. There were several master weavers with that name in the 19th century. He gestured to the blanket. This appears to be what we call a first-phase Chiefs blanket, created between 1820 and 1860. The indigo blue dye was imported from Mexico at great expense. The red, as you might know, comes from cochineal beetles, which were worth more than gold by weight during that period. He pointed to specific elements of the pattern. These designs represent harmony with nature, balance between earth and sky. The way they're executed here, the tension of the weave, the precision of the patterns, this was made by a master. There are fewer than 30 authenticated first-phase blankets in existence today. I sat there, trying to process what he was saying. So it's rare? Dr. Gonzalez laughed softly. That's an understatement. It's museum quality. The last one that came to auction sold for $1.8 million. It wasn't in as good condition as this one appears to be. The number hit me like a physical blow. Million, with an M, more money than I would earn in decades at the hardware store. More than enough to change my entire life. That's impossible, I said, my voice barely audible over the coffee shop chatter. I understand your skepticism, Dr. Gonzalez said, nodding. And I want to be clear, I'm making an educated assessment based on what I can see. To be certain, we would need to authenticate it properly. Carbon dating, dye analysis, weave examination. I can help facilitate that process if you're interested. My mind was racing. This had to be a mistake or a dream or some elaborate scam I was too naive to see through. But looking at Dr. Gonzalez's earnest expression, the way he kept glancing at the blanket with barely contained academic excitement, it was hard to doubt his sincerity. What would authentication involve? I asked cautiously. I would connect you with the Textile Conservation Laboratory at the university. They have all the equipment needed. It's a non-destructive process. They take tiny samples of fibers from inconspicuous areas, examine the weave structure, analyze the dyes. The whole process usually takes about a week. And how much does that cost? He waved a hand dismissively. Nothing to you. I would sponsor it as part of my research department's work. All I would ask is permission to document it for academic purposes. It still seemed too good to be true. Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me. Dr. Gonzalez's expression turned solemn. Because these blankets aren't just valuable objects. They're pieces of cultural history. Each one that's properly identified and documented helps us better understand Navajo weaving traditions. And frankly, I've been studying these textiles my entire career. The chance to examine an unknown example, possibly with provenance linking it to a known weaving family, that's worth more to me than money. I believed him. His passion reminded me of Ruby when she talked about her heritage. That same mix of reverence and enthusiasm. Okay, I said finally, let's authenticate it. Dr. Gonzalez broke into a wide smile. Excellent. I can arrange everything for early next week. I'll need you to bring the blanket to the lab in Albuquerque. He paused, considering. Actually, I should give you a proper protected container for transport. He opened his briefcase and pulled out what looked like a flat, acid-free archival box. This will be safer than plastic. Together, we carefully transferred the blanket into the box, Dr. Gonzalez giving instructions on the proper way to handle it without putting stress on the fibers. Before closing the box, he took several photos with a professional-looking camera, explaining each was for preliminary documentation. We made arrangements the following Tuesday, exchanged phone numbers, and then, almost in a daze, I watched him leave the coffee shop. I sat there for a long time afterward, staring at the archival box as if it might disappear if I looked away. When I finally left, I called Sarah immediately, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. She screamed so loud, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Jake, do you know what this means? You're rich. You could pay off your student loans, buy a house, start that cafe you've always talked about. We don't know for sure yet, I cautioned, though her excitement was infectious. It needs to be authenticated. But even if it's worth half what he thinks, that's still life-changing money. Life-changing. The words echoed in my head all weekend. By Tuesday morning, when I drove to Albuquerque with the blanket carefully secured in Dr. Gonzalez's box, I had started to let myself believe, just a little. The textile conservation lab was impressive, a state-of-the-art facility with specialized equipment I couldn't begin to understand. Dr. Gonzalez introduced me to the lead conservator, Dr. Eliza Chun, who explained each step of the process they would undertake. They took the blanket with such reverence, handling it with white gloves, that I finally started to grasp how special it might truly be. "We'll call you as soon as we have results," Dr. Chin promised, "probably by early next week." The wait was excruciating. I kept checking my phone, jumping every time it buzzed, unable to focus at work. Sarah tried to keep me distracted, but even she was on edge with anticipation. 8 days later, not that I was counting, my phone rang with an Albuquerque number. It was Dr. Gonzalez. "Jake," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice before he even continued. "The authentication is complete. It's exactly what I thought. A first-phase chief blanket, circa 1840 to 1850. The dye analysis confirms traditional materials. The weave structure is consistent with the period, and carbon dating places it in the mid-19th century." I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. "So it's real, very real, and given its condition and the clear Begay family connection, it's exceptionally valuable. I've already had inquiries from several museums that heard about it through the Conservation Network." My heart was pounding. "What happens now?" "That's entirely up to you, Jake. You have several options. You could sell it at auction. Christie's or Sotheby's will be fighting over the right to list it. You could sell it privately to a museum or collector. Or you could keep it, of course." Keep it. The option hit me with unexpected force. This wasn't just a valuable object. It was Ruby's blanket, the one we'd sat under for countless hours, the one that had connected us. Could I really let it go? "I need to think," I said. "Of course. Take your time." He paused. "There is one other option I should mention. The Navajo Nation Museum has expressed interest. They're prepared to make an offer, a substantial one, to bring the blanket home, so to speak, to have it as part of their permanent collection, where it would be preserved and displayed as part of their cultural heritage." Something about that felt right. Ruby had always talked about honoring her heritage, about the importance of remembering where you came from. How substantial? I asked. $1.5 million. It's below market value for private sale, but it would be going to its cultural home, which matters to some sellers. The number still seemed impossible. Life-changing, as Sarah had said. Enough to completely alter the course of my river. "Can I let you know tomorrow? I need to talk to my girlfriend." "Of course. Take all the time you need." That night, Sarah and I sat on our couch, looking at photos of the blanket Dr. Gonzalez had sent me, high-resolution images taken during the authentication process. The actual blanket was still at the lab, now stored in their climate-controlled preservation room. But these detailed pictures showed every thread, every pattern of what had suddenly transformed from a comforting memory to a life-altering opportunity. "What are you thinking?" she asked, watching me stare at the patterns that had suddenly transformed from comforting memories to life-altering opportunity. "I'm thinking about Ruby," I said honestly, about what she'd want. "And what do you think that is?" I traced the pattern with my eyes, remembering Ruby's stories. She was proud of her heritage. She wanted me to understand where her people came from, what they'd endured, what they created. She used to say that the past isn't just something you remember, it's something you honor. I looked up at Sarah. "The museum wants to buy it. The Navajo Nation Museum. They display it, preserve it, use it to teach people about the art and culture it represents." Sarah nodded slowly. "That sounds like something that would make Ruby proud. But it's our connection. My memories of her are wrapped up in this blanket." "Jake," Sarah said gently, "the blanket isn't Ruby. Your memories, the stories she told you, the way she made you feel valued when no one else did, those aren't in the fabric. They're in you. She gave you those gifts directly." I knew she was right. Ruby had given me far more than a blanket, whether it was worth millions or nothing at all. She'd given me confidence when my family tore it down, perspective when the world seemed overwhelming, wisdom that I carried with me every day. And think about what you could do with that money, Sarah continued. You've always talked about opening a cafe. You could do that now. You could create something that honors Ruby in a living, breathing way, not just a blanket in your closet that you're afraid to touch. The idea bloomed in my mind. A cafe named after Ruby. A place that served the food she loved, that had the warmth and welcome she always offered. A place where people could gather and share stories, just like Ruby and I had done on her porch. Your grandmother wanted you to stand tall, Sarah said, squeezing my hand. But she also wanted you to honor your roots. Maybe this is a way to do both. Every night that week, I dreamed of Ruby. Not sad dreams of loss, but comforting dreams where she sat across from me, smiling that knowing smile of hers. In one dream, she spoke to me clearly. Do the right thing, Jake. When I woke, I knew what that meant. The blanket deserved to be seen, to be preserved, to tell its story and the story of the people who created it. Ruby would want that, and with the resources its sale would provide, I could honor her in my own way. I called Dr. Gonzalez that morning. I want to sell it to the Navajo Nation Museum. I told him. I think that's a wonderful decision, he said warmly. They'll be thrilled. I can arrange a meeting with their acquisition director next week, if that works for you. The paperwork was surprisingly simple. The museum representatives treated me with respect and gratitude, explaining how the blanket would be displayed, how it would be used to educate visitors about Navajo weaving traditions. They told me about their climate control preservation rooms, their security systems, their commitment to cultural repatriation. When I signed the final papers, transferring ownership of Ruby's blanket to the Navajo Nation in exchange for a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen, I felt a bittersweet mix of loss and possibility. As I handed over the archival box, now lined with museum-quality materials, I whispered a silent goodbye to the blanket and a thank you to Ruby. The museum director, a Navajo woman about Ruby's age, must have sensed my emotion. She placed a hand on my arm and said, Your grandmother's legacy will teach generations about our traditions. There is no greater honor. I left with tears in my eyes, but a lightness in my step. Ruby's blanket had found its way home, and with the check in my pocket, I was ready to build something new, something that would make her proud. The check from the Navajo Nation Museum sat in our bank account for 2 weeks before I could bring myself to touch it. $1.5 million. The numbers on the screen seemed unreal, like some kind of glitch that would be fixed if I refreshed the page. Every morning, I'd log in just to make sure it was still there. We should make a plan, Sarah said one evening over takeout Chinese. We'd been too stunned to make any major moves, paralyzed by the sudden weight of possibility. What do you want to do first? I twirled lo mein around my fork, thinking the obvious answer was to pay off debt, my student loans, our credit cards, the used car I was still making payments on. But beyond that, I want to open that cafe. I said finally, the one I've talked about for years. But I want to do it right. Sarah's face lit up. She'd heard me talk about this dream 100 times, sketching layouts on napkins, describing menus I composed in my head. It had always been just that, a dream, something to think about while stocking shelves at the hardware store. Tell me what right looks like, she prompted. I want to honor Ruby, I said, the idea forming as I spoke, not just with the name, but with everything, the food she taught me to make, the stories she told, her heritage, a place that feels like sitting on her porch, warm, welcoming, where you feel like you belong even if you're different. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. We could incorporate Navajo design elements, not in a cheesy-themed way, but subtle, respectful. That conversation sparked months of planning. We found location downtown, a former bookstore with big windows and exposed brick walls. We hired a Navajo consultant to ensure every design choice was culturally respectful. We developed a menu that blended Ruby's traditional recipes with contemporary cafe fare. I insisted on doing things debt-free. No loans, no investors demanding returns or creative control. The money from the blanket meant we could build exactly what we envisioned without compromise. We named it Ruby's Legacy. The sign was simple, hand-painted in deep reds and blues that echoed the colors of the blanket. Inside, the walls featured historical photos of Navajo weavers alongside modern Navajo artists. One wall was dedicated to a large photograph of Ruby on her porch, her eyes crinkling at the corners as she smiled at the camera, at me, behind the lens. The menu included traditional fry bread, a crucial Navajo staple born during the tribe's forced relocation in the 1860s, a symbol of resilience and adaptation. We served blue corn mush with honey, sage tea, and hearty stews alongside more familiar cafe offerings. Each traditional item came with a small card explaining its cultural significance. Opening day arrived 9 months after I'd sold the blanket. Sarah had handled the social media marketing, creating buzz in the local food scene. I'd expected a modest turnout, maybe a few curious locals, some friends who promised support us. What we got was a line stretching down the block. The TikTok fame of the blanket had created unexpected interest in our story. Sarah had cleverly tied it all together in our marketing. From blanket to beans, how a family heirloom brewed a dream. Local news had picked it up, and suddenly our little cafe opening was the talk of the town. That first day was a blur of activity. I worked the counter while Sarah managed the floor. We'd hired a small staff, including 2 Navajo culinary students from the community college, but we were still running on adrenaline and coffee by closing time. "We did it," Sarah whispered as we locked the doors that night, exhausted but exhilarated. Ruby would be so proud. I looked around at what we created. At the warm lighting reflecting off the brick walls, the comfortable seating areas designed for conversation, the photographs telling stories of a culture that had survived against impossible odds. It felt right. It felt like Ruby. The cafe thrived beyond our expectations. Local food critics praised our unique concept and execution. The community college asked if we considered taking on interns from their culinary program. We started hosting monthly storytelling nights, where people from all backgrounds could share their family histories. 6 months after opening, I was working behind a counter during the morning rush when I heard the bell above the door. Glancing up to greet the new customers, I froze. My father, mother, and brother Tim stood just inside the entrance, looking around with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. They hadn't called or texted to say they were coming. We hadn't spoken since the day I'd taken Ruby's blanket from Rocky's doghouse. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then muscle memory kicked in, and I forced a professional smile. "Welcome to Ruby's legacy," I said, the rehearsed greeting feeling strange on my tongue. They approached the counter slowly, taking the photographs, the decor, the busy tables filled with customers enjoying their breakfasts. My mother looked nervous, my father impassive as always. Tim's expression was unreadable. "So this is where you work now?" my father asked, his tone suggesting he was making small talk with a stranger. He didn't recognize me in my context, in a crisp button-down shirt and apron, confident behind the counter of a successful business. "I own the place," I said simply. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Tim snorted. "Right, and I'm the tooth fairy." I didn't have time to respond before Marissa, our floor manager, approached. "Excuse me, Mr. Reynolds." The supplier called about the special order for the weekend event. The look on my family's faces was priceless. Their eyes darted between Marissa and me, recalibrating in real time. "I'll call them back in a few minutes," I told her. "In the meantime, could you show my family to a table?" "Family discount," I added with a small, pointed smile. As Marissa led them to a corner table, I saw them taking the cafe with new eyes. The busy staff, the full tables, the tasteful decor, the photograph of Ruby on the wall, the framed article from the local business journal naming Ruby's legacy the best new cafe in the region. I finished my shift at the counter before joining them. By then, they'd been served the house specialties: blue corn pancakes with piñon nut butter, Navajo tea, and cinnamon spice hot chocolate, made exactly the way Ruby used to make it. "Jake," my mother said as I slid into the empty chair, "this place it's wonderful." "Thanks," I said, still guarded. "We worked hard on it." "We?" my father asked. "Sarah and I, my girlfriend, She runs the business side. I handle the kitchen and menu. How did you... My father gestured around, unable to finish the question. How did you afford this? How did you create this? How did you do something impressive without our knowledge or approval? Remember that blanket? I said, looking directly at Tim. The one your dog was sleeping on? The worthless rag you charged me $100 for? Tim had the grace to look uncomfortable. Yeah, what about it? It was a first phase Chief Navajo blanket from the 1840s. Museum quality. One of fewer than 30 in existence. My father's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. What? I sold it to the Navajo Nation Museum for $1.5 million, I said, feeling a strange calm as I watched their faces transform. They have it on display now. There's a plaque acknowledging the Begay family provenance, Ruby's family. Tim's face reddened. But we all had a claim to that. You took it. You knew it was valuable. I had no idea when I bought it from you. I corrected him. I just wanted something of Ruby's. Something of my heritage that mattered to me. You're the one who decided it was trash. Tim, you literally had your dog sleeping on what turned out to be a national treasure. My mother had gone pale. Jake, we didn't know. Of course you didn't. Neither did I. But you didn't care enough about Ruby or what mattered to me to even consider that her things might have value. Not just monetary value, but personal, cultural value. Tim was still processing the magnitude of what he'd lost. 1 million, he sputtered, and a half. I added, unable to resist twisting the knife just a little. Plus, the museum director said it was actually worth closer to 3 million on the private market, but I wanted to go where it belonged. Tim slumped in his chair, the truth finally sinking in. He'd literally sold a fortune for $100 because he couldn't see value in anything that wasn't already validated by the world he respected. My father, always quicker to adapt, was studying me with new eyes, not with the disappointment I had grown used to, but with something I had never seen before, respect, maybe even a touch of awe. You built all this, he said, gesturing to the cafe, with the money from a blanket. I nodded. We invested most of it. This place is just the beginning. Something shifted in his expression then, a recognition I'd waited my whole life to see. Jake, he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I was wrong about you. You've done something remarkable here. Something I never could have done. The words I'd always wanted to hear. The validation I'd spent years chasing. And strangely, I found they didn't matter as much as I'd expected. Thank you for coming, I said simply, neither accepting nor rejecting his belated approval. It felt good. Sure, I'm only human. But I realized in that moment that I no longer needed it the way I once had. They stayed for another hour. My mother asked about the recipes, genuinely interested. Tim remained sullen, but managed to compliment the food. My father asked careful questions about the business model, nodding with new respect at my answers. When they finally left, promising to return soon, a promise I neither believed nor disbelieved, I felt a strange lightness. Not the vindictive triumph I might have imagined in my darker moments, but something healthier, closure. As an ancient philosopher once said, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy, or as Ruby would put it more simply, living well is the best revenge. I watched them drive away, then went back inside to the world I was building. My world, Ruby's legacy. In the month that followed, Sarah and I settled into a rhythm. The cafe continued to thrive, and we began thinking about expansion. Not just a second location, but complementary businesses. A small art gallery featuring Native American artists. A community space for workshops and classes. We bought a modest house a few blocks from the cafe. Nothing extravagant. We could have afforded something flashier, but that wasn't the point. What mattered was that it was ours mortgage-free. With a wide front porch where I could sit on Sunday mornings with a cup of hot chocolate, watching the desert sunrise the way Ruby had taught me. The porch became my thinking spot. I'd sit there with a notebook, sketching ideas, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Sometimes Sarah would join me, curled up with her sketchbook, the comfortable silence between us like a warm blanket. "What are you thinking about?" she asked one such morning, the sky painted in the same reds and blues as Ruby's blanket had been. "Legacy," I said. "Not just Ruby's, but what we're building." We'd established the Ruby Begay Scholarship Fund for Navajo students pursuing arts and culinary education. Each year, we funded 5 full scholarships, with recipients working at the cafe if they chose to, learning the business from the inside. Our first scholarship student, Kiana, was now our assistant manager, bringing her own innovations to the menu and operations. Watching her confidence grow reminded me of how Ruby had nurtured mine. I had a letter from the museum yesterday. I told Sarah they're doing a special exhibition on Navajo textiles next year. They want us to be part of the opening ceremony. Sarah smiled. Ruby would love that. Her blanket bringing you full circle. I nodded, thinking about circles and rivers and paths. You know what's strange? I don't hate my family anymore. Really? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Not even Tim? I laughed. Well, Tim's still Tim. But the anger isn't there like it was. They haven't changed, but I have. I don't need them to validate me anymore. And that was the truth. My family still visited the cafe occasionally, still moved awkwardly around the new reality of my success. My father had made tentative suggestions about family business opportunities that I'd politely declined. Tim had tried to borrow money once, which I'd also declined, though I'd offered him a job instead. He hadn't taken me up on it. I didn't defeat them, I realized aloud. I defeated the version of myself that believed them when they said I was nothing. Ruby had tried to tell me this all along. Your path is like a river, she'd said. Sometimes it twists and turns, but it always reaches the sea. The river had taken an unexpected course. But here I was, exactly where I was meant to be. Last week, a young Navajo artist came into the cafe. She'd heard our story and wanted to show me something. From her portfolio, she pulled out a sketch of a textile design, a modern interpretation of traditional patterns, incorporating elements that honored the past while creating something new. I saw your grandmother's blanket at the museum, she told me. It inspired this collection. I wanted you to see it first. As I looked at her work, bold, innovative, deeply rooted in tradition, yet speaking to the future, I felt Ruby's presence so strongly I almost looked over my shoulder. She would love this, I said, my voice thick with emotion. This is exactly what legacy means. The artist smiled, understanding perfectly. I've thought a lot about value since finding out what Ruby's blanket was worth. How something can be dismissed as worthless by people who don't understand it. How true worth isn't always visible on the surface. Ruby knew this. She saw value in me when no one else did. She recognized the worth of her heritage when others had forgotten. She understood that some treasures aren't meant to be locked away, but shared, so their stories can continue. My family thought the blanket was just an old rag. Tim thought I was charging it to Rocky's doghouse. But Ruby knew better, and somehow she made sure I would eventually know better too. So here's what I've learned, what I want to share with you. Hold on to your blankets, your memories, the things that connect you to who you really are. They might seem worthless to others, but they're the threads that weave your story. And one day, they might lead you home. Ruby once told me, your value isn't in what others think of you, it's in what you do. I think about that every morning when I unlock the cafe doors. Every time a customer tells me their visit made them feel at home. Every time a scholarship student graduates and goes on to create something new. I'm not saying everyone has $1 million blanket hidden in their past, but I do believe everyone has something valuable that others might not see. A talent, a perspective, a way of moving to the world that is uniquely theirs. The Navajo have a saying, walk in beauty. It means living in harmony with the world around you, finding balance within yourself and with others. That's what I'm trying to do now. Not proving myself to anyone, not seeking validation from those who couldn't see me, just walking my path, creating beauty where I can. Sometimes I dream about Ruby, not sad dreams of loss, but peaceful ones where she's sitting on her porch, nodding approvingly as I tell her about my day. In one dream, she said something I'll never forget. See? Your river found its way, just like I said it would. The blanket that was once dismissed as trash now hangs in a museum, teaching thousands about Navajo culture and artistry. The grandson who was once dismissed as worthless now runs a thriving business that honors his heritage and creates opportunities for others. If that's not a legacy to be proud of, I don't know what is. So here's to Ruby, to blankets that hold more than warmth, to rivers that always find their way to the sea. And here's to you, finding the value in what others might overlook, especially if that something is yourself.